I'm actually a bit confused by Gaban. Right before this flashback started, Gaban said that he had, quote, sensed a strange haki from the castle. But really, now that we've actually seen the flashback, we know the truth, and Gaban actually saw everything with his own eyes. And because he's someone who had fought the God's Knights before in his life, there really was no confusion that the world government was somehow controlling Harald. So I don't know what he was on about that strange haki. He should have just said point blank, oh, by the way, Harald was controlled by the government. Case closed. So here we have Shanks and Jarl talking about Ragnar and how incredibly powerful it was, to the point where it was able to stop Harald in his immortal state. And this is the first time we've seen a character who's, quote, immortal actually die in the story. Like, for example, even Roxy Sebek was unable to kill Garling on God Valley. But here, Loki was actually able to kill Harald, even though they had the same contract. So I think there's like maybe two ideas on my mind on how this could have happened. One is that Ragnar somehow just amplifies Loki's Conqueror's haki to a point where it's so powerful that it's even able to kill immortal characters. Or two, Ragnar has its own special power that actually allows it to bypass the immortality factor. But really, from what I remember about the fight between Harald and Loki, it genuinely just looks like you need to hit the immortal character enough times with strong enough Conqueror's haki, and they will eventually go down. So, in theory, if Sebek had kept hitting Garling enough on God Valley, even Garling would have died. Oh, and speak of the devil, Garling, even though what he's saying is very filthy, this is actually an endearing moment. Like, maybe this could actually be Garling's most sympathetic moment in the story so far, where he actually has no problem welcoming Shanks back to the Holy Land, even though he's lived his whole life in the lower world, which is a pretty big deal for Garling, where I would have imagined that Garling would hate Shanks just because he grew up in the lower world. So for him, this is a remarkable show of empathy. But it also kind of shows that Garling's weak point may actually be his children, because it was kind of obvious that Shanks may have had an angle when he came back to the Holy Land. But in this scene, Garling appears to be completely naive about Shanks having ulterior motives. So basically, he's so invested in his children being loyal celestial dragons that he was willing to buy that Shanks was willing to come back to them. Or maybe Garling is just an idiot. But someone who isn't an idiot, however, is Copper Gaban, who's slowly becoming actually one of my favorite characters in all of One Piece. As we know, Gaban is not only one of the few biological dads in One Piece who actually didn't abandon their child, but even here, even though Shanks is a grown man, Gaban is still immediately willing to parent him and give him good advice. And this also kind of reminds you that Shanks in this scene is not the wise, stoic leader we know him in the present story, because this is years in the past, and Shanks still has not had all of his experiences. Like the Shanks we know from the present story has much more emotional control than Shanks from 14 years ago. This also, I think, adds a lot to his character, and shows Shanks' own journey and how it has shaped him as a person. It is also interesting that Shanks is holding his left hand, the one he later lost to the Lord of the Coast. Like, based on him, Imu's ability to control someone is based on proximity. So maybe this is Imu putting some control over Shanks, but I think this is more so like just Shanks being emotional, where he resents his celestial dragon side. And that's kind of what the left arm, where he has the Mark of the Abyss, represents. And yeah, Gaban kind of word for word says one of the biggest ideas of the One Piece story, which is that the thing that ultimately matters is not how you were born, but the circumstances of your life and what you've been through, which is something we see over and over again. And it's kind of the big thing surrounding the dynamic between Shanks and Shamrock. I think I gotta disagree with Loki here a bit, when he says that the only reason why this happened to Harald was because he loved his country too much. I think the bigger reason is that Harald is just the dumbest person ever. I'm extremely confused by Imu's words here, where he's seemingly unaware that Loki was the one who killed Harald, when a few chapters ago we saw that Imu does have the telepathic link to Harald. So, at least the way I see it, Imu should have been able to observe Harald through the entire massacre, and personally seen that Loki was the one who killed him. So maybe the way Imu's telepathy works is that it doesn't actually give you vision. It's only kind of a phone call. Well, it only allows you to communicate with the other person, but not actually see what they're seeing. To be able to do that, Imu would actually have to possess the person, like he did to Saturn or Kunko. Also, another thing I'm confused by is Imu's reason for letting Elbaf be. Where okay, it kind of makes sense that he currently doesn't have intel on Loki, or what actually killed Harald, so he wants to wait for a bit. But still, it took 14 years for the world government to make their move on Elbaf again. And in the timeline, Loki himself was captured like 6 years ago, so I really don't know why they waited so long. Like, okay, maybe wait a few years, but why 14 whole years? When Imu actually knows that he needs the giants for the final war. I'm really interested by Imu's line that every covenant comes with a price to be paid, even for Mu. And as we see here, Imu is huffing a lot, so it's like he's exhausted after Harald was actually killed. So this seemingly indicates that all of these knights are, I guess, connected to Imu's own life force in some way, where it's possible that when they use these special abilities, they're literally using Imu's stamina and energy, which could mean that to finally kill Imu at some point, you need to kill every person with the contract. Or perhaps that if you kill every person with the contract, Imu becomes weakened enough that he can be finally defeated. I don't know. I still plan on doing a whole video on what I think is the true origin story of Imu's special abilities, but who knows when I'll have enough time for that. Also, Imu keeps referring to Harald as an ancient giant, even though, as far as I know, it was more so that the story before said that Harald only had ancient giant blood, and he did kind of look different from Ors and Ors Jr. And my own idea is that if places like Onigashima are any reference, the actual ancient giants who lived hundreds of years in the past were enormous, even compared to Harald and Loki. This is also by far the most Imu has ever spoken in the story, which is kind of cool. It shows that he actually has a bit of a mind of his own, and he isn't just like a simpleton who has the elders do all of his thinking for him. And yeah, Imu does say that this disappointing outcome proves that history does not lie, we were always going to be incompatible. But at the same time, 14 years later, he still tried to take over the giants. So I guess it only means that he's not going to play nice in the future, but that he's just going to basically force the giants to be his slaves, without any of this theatrics that he used with Harald. Imu's line about Elbaf being off the D is probably the subject of my next video. I know I've been pretty inactive lately, but I will break down the reasons why at the end of this video. I still think it's pretty likely that when Loki set out to sea, he actually became one of the most notorious pirates in the New World, and maybe even an Emperor of the Sea, considering his power. And the fact that when Shanks and Loki later had their fight, Shanks immediately became an emperor after defeating Loki. But really, even though this was supposed to be the Loki flashback, we basically didn't get to see a huge chunk of his life, which was basically the years after he killed Harald, where for example, he didn't not only fight Shanks, but he also got a crush on Lola. So I'm guessing this is stuff we will get later in the arc, where even though this was the longest flashback ever, it was only the Loki flashback episode 1. And at some point we will get episode 2, which I don't think will take multiple chapters. I think it'll just take a few pages. But still, these are really big unanswered questions. Like, what actually happened between Loki and Lola? And why did Shanks, even though they're kind of on the same page in this chapter, why did Shanks years later actually fight Loki? And based on the interaction between Loki and Jarl in this chapter, it's pretty clear that Jarl actually isn't Mosa, which by default probably means that Mosa is actually Shirahoshi, which also would mean that Shirahoshi is currently in a lot of trouble. So now that Loki is actually freed, he kind of owes Luffy the favor of telling him what Shanks is up to right now. But I think that's another thing that's going to be put on hold, where clearly their big priority right now is to protect Elbaf from the world government. Considering how sudden this scene between Chopper and Gaban is, I'm pretty sure that Oda basically changed his mind, where originally the plan was for Chopper and Gaban to stay in the underworld, but along the last few months, the plan changed, and now they're going to participate in the fight. I guess originally the big reason was that it was this big mystery how to defeat these immortal characters, so that's why Gaban had to stay on the sidelines for Luffy and company to figure it out by themselves. But honestly, based on everything we've seen in the flashback, it really looks like the answer is so simple. Like, you really just need to use Conqueror's Haki. And if that doesn't work, use more Conqueror's Haki. So there's really no big mystery about it. I have to say, the end of this chapter really isn't much of an ending, because in terms of combat, defeating one of these nightmare demons really isn't that impressive. Where months ago earlier in the arc, we even saw that the Elbaf principal was able to overpower these guys. But hey, I guess it's nice to see that Loki is finally fully free. So basically the reason why I've been inactive on YouTube lately is that for a few months now I've been looking for like a free space to handle everything in my personal life. And since both the anime and the manga were on break since Christmas, I kind of decided to take this opportunity to handle my personal life. But more bad news is that in February, I'm once again going to be overseas for more than a month. So both the quality and the quantity of my videos is going to probably go down in that period. So in a nutshell, I'm going to be very unoptimal on YouTube until March of 2026. But it's not the worst timing, since that's also when One Piece live action season 2 is coming out. And it's only a few weeks after that, and we'll have the anime back again. So yeah, nothing dramatic. I will still continue being a One Piece YouTuber. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and huge thanks to my members. I'm really surprised that many of you actually stuck by me during this very inactive, low quality period. So thanks for that. And thanks to everybody who watched this video to the end.